Hello and welcome back. Before I get started, don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you like what I'm doing here, feel free to visit my Patreon page so I can continue to bring you even higher quality content. The Supreme Court's ruling on Dobbs versus Jackson is the most egregious case of judicial overreach that has been seen in many years. The question before the court was whether the state of Mississippi could prescribe abortions after the 15th week of pregnancy, or to put it another way, to prohibit the procedure one trimester earlier than was the case under earlier rulings. Instead, 5 of the 6 conservative justices chose to expand the ruling far beyond the question originally before the court and use this case to overturn the precedent of Roe v. Wade in its entirety. This wouldn't be the first time that the Supreme Court reversed precedent set in an earlier case. In 1896, the court ruled that racially segregated accommodations were legal as long as the accommodations were separate but equal. That precedent would stand for 58 years until the court handed down its ruling on Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, which asked the questions, were the conditions of segregated schools truly equal? The court had the case argued twice, once in the spring of 1953 and re-argued in the fall of 1953 before releasing a 9-0 ruling. The re-arguing of the case was brought about because there were two sides to the court: those who believed in judicial activism, those who essentially believed that with time society changes and the court's ruling should reflect society as it is today, and the other justices who believed in judicial restraint. This bloc believed that the several legislatures, both federal and state, were where the major changes should come from. This bloc also held that stare decisis, the premise that past precedents should be used as guidance when crafting future decisions, should be followed when writing decisions. As a general rule, activist judges were considered to be from the court's liberal side, and those who favored judicial restraints as being from the court's conservative side. Oh my, how times have changed. The activist judges who choose to completely ignore precedent in crafting their rulings are now made up of the 5 clearly, one could even say stridently, conservative justices. It now seems that the political sides have shifted and the liberal side calls for restraint, while the conservative side is willing to throw out precedents like pieces of rotten fruit and restrict the rights and freedoms that Americans have come to respect over the last several decades. Dodd is not the only precedent that these conservative justices have seen either as aberrant to their own personal prejudices or as inconveniences to law enforcement and prosecutors. This same court, in another 6-3 decision, held that Miranda warnings don't necessarily need to be read to suspects for their comments to be used against them in a court of law. In writing the majority opinion, conservative darling Samuel Alito wrote that Miranda rights are, quote, not themselves protected by the Constitution. At this rate, Alito will be coming out in favor of interrogations made with the use of a rubber hose. While the Dobbs ruling was technically a 6-3 decision, it should be noted that 3 justices wrote concurring opinions, meaning they did not agree in toto with Alito's reasoning. In his concurrence, Justice Kavanaugh stated that it would be unconstitutional for any state to forbid a woman from crossing state lines to get an abortion in a state where abortion is legal. as well as noting that trying to punish a woman for receiving an abortion performed before the Dobbs ruling was handed down would be a violation of that person's rights. Chief Justice Roberts was the only member of the majority who actually ruled solely on the matter before the court, that being if it was legal for the state of Mississippi to prohibit abortions after the 15th week of gestation. Justice Thomas wrote a concurrence that makes Alito's ruling read like an essay in judicial restraint. Clarence Thomas wrote that, in future cases, he says, we should consider all of the court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, which is the right for married couples to seek contraception, Lawrence, about gay bedroom affairs, and Obergefell, which is the ruling that brought about gay marriage. Justice Thomas wishes, hypocritically it should be noted, to be able to pick and choose which substantive due process precedents he wants to overturn. The fact is, he wants to overturn cases that do not affect him personally. Simply put, sandwiched in between Greenwald and Lawrence is another substantive due process case that had nationwide impact, Loving versus Virginia. Richard Loving was a white man who fell in love with Mildred Jeter, a black woman. Since they could not legally marry in Virginia because of Virginia's anti-miscegenation laws, they went to Washington, D.C. and got married there. After returning to their home in Central Point, Virginia, their home was raided in the middle of the night and they were arrested for being of different races and cohabiting and charged with felonies. They pled guilty to cohabiting as man and wife against the peace and dignity of the Commonwealth. They were given a suspended sentence and told to leave the state and not come back as a couple for 25 years. Justice Thomas, you do not get to pick and choose which due process cases to overturn and which ones to keep. Once you overturn substantive due process, all cases that it involves are null and void and revert back to previous. If you choose to go the limit, you may well find that substantive due process will be thrown out completely, and you and your wife, Jenny, a white woman, may well find that county sheriff kicking down your door and arresting you and your wife for being black and white and in love. Well, that's it for today. So long, stay safe, drink one for me. Over and out.